Hi, everybody. It's Haley here with Nicole as well from OMX. Thank you for joining today's webinar to engage with Canadians, particularly the academic community, on the work that Avicent is doing in identifying the key industrial capabilities for Canada to focus on through its procurement going forward. OMX is pleased to be working with Avicent on this initiative, particularly in helping to provide data on the Canadian industrial base, academic research capabilities, and collaborating with them to engage key stakeholders in order to seek feedback on the direction of their findings. So for those of you who don't know OMX, we are an online platform used by the government, industry, and academia to connect, manage, and analyze data on the industrial base, as well as track the impacts from government procurements. The purpose of today's webinar is really about seeking feedback, and we want to encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. There is an option in GoToWebinar, a couple of you used it already, to write in anything you want to ask the presenter. So feel free to write in questions whenever they pop into your head. You don't need to wait till the end. There will also be an online forum where you can submit additional feedback after the fact, and that link will be sent out in a follow-up email. So please don't hesitate. We want to get your opinions and your questions asked. So please write them in throughout. The agenda for today is the following. Avicent will be providing an overview of the findings and some data surrounding KICs. The presentation will take between 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A and dialogue. So following that, we again encourage you to use the online feedback form to provide further feedback. And with that being said, I'm just going to share Alex's screen. So Alex, at any time, you can go ahead.
Thanks very much, Haley. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, thank both Nicole and Haley for the introduction there. And OMX has been a great partner for us here at Avicent. Just a word or two about our firm as well. My name is, first of all, Alec Jovich. I'm a principal here at Avicent and have been helping direct our efforts working for ISED and the Government of Canada since late 2015 on KICs and frankly broader issues in the defense industrial landscape in Canada. I'm joined by Ian Power, one of our analysts on the team as well. As Haley noted, I'm going to talk for a while and walk you through a host of slides that we have been sharing with folks across Canada, and then we will go to a little bit of time for Q&A. That will not be the end of the dialogue. Again, as Haley noted, we are continuing to collect comments, suggestions, and questions via our online portal, and we'll share that data again and the URL for that again over the course of the session and then in follow-on emails. As I said, Avicent is a management consulting firm. We have offices in Washington, in Ottawa, and Paris, and London. And we focus on those markets that are either heavily regulated by government or where government is the primary sponsor. No surprise, defense is a major part of our focus areas going forward. And without spending more time on that, I want to give you a little bit of feedback and share a little bit more about the genesis of this project. And so let me walk you through this Gantt chart very briefly. As I mentioned, we kicked this off in November of 2015, and our focus really was on what we had termed international benchmarking. ISED and the Government of Canada were keenly interested to understand the latest on how other governments have managed their defense landscape, the defense industry, how they've structured their procurement processes and acquisition steps and procedures, how they've benefited their home industries, how they've dealt with foreign providers and OEMs. And so a big part of our effort in that early phase of our project was focused really on seeing what others are doing today to help inform what Canada can do going forward. Once we'd accomplished that, we started off on our initial industry engagement, and the focus there was really reaching out to industry players, large and small, across the Canadian landscape to get a better sense of how they viewed KICs. And we'll talk a little bit about where KICs come from, but as you remember, the broader concept is an outgrowth of the Jenkins panel, and the idea is essentially to determine some key technology, industrial or other areas that are core to a country, in this case Canada. And so we talked a great deal with industry about that and compiled those results, and then essentially did our own analysis here using our own databases, proprietary knowledge, expertise in the sector, and again outreach with Canadian industry, large and small, to determine an initial provisional list of KICs. And I want to underline the issue that this is a provisional list of KICs we will be talking about today going forward. Subsequently, we went back to government and briefed out both our immediate clients, but also other departments and agencies in Canada, and got both feedback and were then instructed to move forward with our effort to re-engage with a host of sectors in Canada, to include both industry, academia, provincial and territorial governments, and a host of other actors out there that have an interest in Canada's defense sector. And so we're in that phase now. Keenly interested in getting your questions, your comments, suggestions on all this. This is as much a listening tour for Avison as it is a speaking tour. A couple housekeeping items that I wanted to get through before we get into the gist of our presentation today. The first one really is, again, our goal up until now has been to develop a preliminary list of KICs and to think through the ways that these KICs can be implemented. This last point is very important. In fact, the implementation here is as important as the actual list of KICs. Our goal here is, again, to solicit feedback from a broad spectrum of the Canadian public. Our mandate going forward over the course of the next couple months is to develop a synthesis of the various perspectives and comments that we've heard, and then report back to government. Final item here, very important. This is what we are going to talk about today, are Avison's perspectives and expert opinion. This is not government policy, so I want to be very, very clear about that going forward. A couple of things we want to talk about as we think about KICs, and we want to set a little bit of context going forward. As you see on this slide, let's talk a little bit about the Canadian context first, and then the global context as well. Clearly, the defense sector in Canada is certainly not immune to what goes on both in Canada's national security domain, but also in the global marketplace. I mentioned earlier on that KICs, the genesis of KICs dates back to the Jenkins panel, which spent a considerable amount of time thinking through some core issues surrounding the defense industry in Canada, and proposed a small number of KICs going forward. Now, these KICs were fairly broad, so the number was small, but they were fairly broad. And the Jenkins panel really focused, at least in our impression, much more on ensuring that there was wide acceptance of the concept of KICs going forward. There has been certainly a need for transparency. Industry and other actors in Canada's defense sector have looked to the government to present a more clear picture on what upcoming needs are, to be able to right size and calibrate the amount of investment and time they put into various offerings going forward. And then finally, Canada finds itself at a time of very significant recapitalization across a host of different domains going forward. And so this was an opportune time to really rethink how one deals with KICs. As I mentioned, Canada's defense sector is not only important for the domestic economy, but it's an important player in the global defense and aerospace sector as well. And so it has to take account of those issues too. And a significant amount of things have changed over the last couple decades. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation, frankly, 10 or 20 years ago. But in today's space, Canadian industry is competing with players from Turkey, South Korea, Israel, Brazil, Poland, alongside the traditional competitors in the U.S. Or in Western Europe. So the competitive landscape has grown, often, frankly, as a result of fairly robust and assertive defense industrial policy that these countries have furthered. That brings us to this second issue, greater government activism. Governments have increasingly seen defense spending as a conduit for growing their defense industrial sectors, but also, again, driving more economic development, broadly speaking. And they have not been shy to use the powers at their behest to drive those. Finally, commercial spillover. There's been a change in the direction that technology and research and development have taken, and I'm sure you have all seen this in your everyday. Very clearly, the linkages between commercial technology and defense technology and broader national security requirements have merged, and we now see in certain sectors the commercial space actually leading ahead of defense, and defense looking to the commercial sectors to provide more guidance. And elsewhere we see the defense sector leading, and again, being able to flow over into the commercial space. But the linkages have strengthened over time. A couple of other words on how we considered and who we considered Canadian in this context. And as I go, I apologize. I'm a little under the weather, and so I will occasionally cough, so bear with me. We've gotten some questions over the course of this project on who we consider Canadian in the context of Canada's defense industry and more broadly. And our goal here very much is to define that space. And let's start with Canadian capabilities. We are imagining the industrial sector in Canada is certainly bifurcated, as you all well know, between Canadian firms that are Canadian-owned and domiciled, as well as foreign firms that have a significant effort going forward. And our view of this sector is that really businesses that have core capability and core services offerings in Canada with resident IP in Canada are Canadian businesses as such. The next sector, the Canadian firms we did not consider to be core Canadian firms are those firms that have a marketing and business development presence only in Canada. Those firms really are not encompassed in our view of the Canadian defense industrial landscape. We've also had a lot of questions about who fits into this sector in terms of company size and look and feel. And if you look at sort of the bottom part of this chart, we tried to draw a value chain of players in this sector. Really, all players in this sector, from small to large, fit in here, from component manufacturers to specialist small and medium-sized enterprises, subsystems providers and systems providers, platform primes and integrators, and ultimately defense services providers all fit into this space. The firms that don't fit here are firms that are commodity suppliers or firms that have a very, very small amount of defense business. So if the business has a single-digit percentage of revenue in the defense sector, those are not businesses we focused on as part of this study. Our sense is that those businesses really don't benefit enough or depend enough on the defense sector to really play a significant role in our analysis. Let me talk a little bit about what KICs are and what KICs are not in this context, and I'll start out with what KICs are not meant to be, and these are important issues that we'll want to keep returning to over the course of this conversation. KICs are really not meant to preclude other sectors from receiving government support. So when you look at that list of KICs that we show you that we'll show you in a couple of slides, please appreciate that those sectors, and there are many sectors resident in Canada that don't fit on that list, are not meant to be precluded from receiving all sorts of government support, and we'll talk about what kinds of government programs and support are out there. It is certainly not meant to constrain Canada to a static set of industrial priorities. In fact, we suggest that KICs are revisited on a periodic basis to ensure that they remain fresh and relevant to Canada. Nor are they meant to inhibit competition in the Canadian defense marketplace. Competition obviously is one of the core ways of deriving value in terms of both timing and cost and the quality of products and services, and so that's a core element of Canada's procurement policy. Finally, they are not meant to protect industries through unnecessary procurements. That is certainly not our intent to divert money to areas that are not part of Canada's national security requirements. And they are finally not meant to create orphan industries and technologies that are not independently sustainable. Those are all critical elements of this. And so, with that in mind, what are KICs meant to do? Well, KICs are certainly meant to articulate to industry the priority areas for future growth and investment from the perspective of the government. They're meant to help align government policies and channel global capital to support those national goals. So ensuring that as money flows into Canada, for instance, through the ITB process, it's channeled in the right places. It is certainly meant to promote transparency and predictability in the offset and ITB process as well. And no surprise, it is meant to generate commercial spillover benefits from defense investment. Finally, it is certainly meant to support the cluster concept as well and invigorate it and encourage new clusters in developing. And one takeaway here that's very important before we move on is KICs are really not the only tool that Canada has to support Canadian industry. Far from it. As we start out talking about KICs, it is important to think through how we've defined KICs. And to keep things in an organized fashion, we have developed three broad categories of KICs relevant areas that we see as driving the objectives that KICs are meant to pursue. The first one really focuses on emerging growth opportunities. And we see KICs in this basket of requirements as really identifying and articulating technology priorities that position Canada for future growth. This segment tends to be the one that is most forward-leaning. It is the one certainly that for academics on the line now will be interesting from a research and development perspective, clearly. And it is the one where perhaps there is the most uncertainty of all three of these segments. The second segment really focuses on what we have termed as advantaging leading Canadian competencies. So think of all the industrial sectors where Canada really excels, not just in a domestic context, but in a global context. We see KICs really supporting all those industrial sectors in that global marketplace to, again, help drive export revenue for Canadian firms all across the value chain. Finally, the last segment of KICs really focuses on strategically important capabilities for Canada itself. And here we've really relied to a degree on the view that D&D and other stakeholders in Canada have about sovereignty and security cooperation, security considerations, and that surety of supply that really is vital for Canada to maintain, particularly at times of crisis or war. And so before we get to the list of KICs, and I'm sorry to keep you all from that final list, we want to walk through a broad swath of Canadian capabilities resident in the defense sector in Canada today. And so one of the things that we did, again, working with stakeholders in Canada, working with D&D and others as well, we created an analysis of the overall Canadian defense industrial landscape. And we are showing you here roughly 60 different sectors in Canada that are currently resident. This is Canadian capacity and capability, but again, from marginal to world-beating. So this is sort of the holistic view of what's done in Canada today across 5 sectors: air, land, maritime, the C4I sector, and then space. Again, on the defense side. So you see some very impressive capabilities here across the board. But again, the scope, scale, and quality of Canadian capabilities varies greatly across these 58 or so different sectors and segments. With those 58 or so segments in hand, we needed to filter down to a smaller, more manageable list of KICs. And we'll talk about that number going forward. We were not chasing a magical number of KICs, 5, 7, 20, 15, but rather looking for one that made sense across a set of defined and distinct criteria. And so let's just walk through very briefly this set of criteria that we have established. The first one is industrial base. So we were really looking for firms here and capabilities that had a significant presence in Canada, and really measuring that as a combination of technical differentiation, employment, revenue, the number of firms, where they sat in the supply chain. We were looking really for that differentiation across all those characteristics. Second, we wanted to ensure that KICs were supporting and advantaging those sectors that had a significantly large global market. In this case, we took a size of $500 million of annual spend a year. They could be credibly addressed by Canadian firms. And so we narrowed our view to look at markets in what is termed as the West, the NATO markets, Asia, and elsewhere. Again, ignoring those defense markets such as Russia and China, where Canada does not have the ability to play. Third, we considered market growth. In this case, we're really looking for an understanding of the broader market dynamics and how customer demand will change over time given operational, technical, and geopolitical trends going forward. So we're looking for high growth areas in the defense sector, right, that would provide a reasonable amount of dynamism for Canadian industry. The final two segments here really focus on government priorities, Canadian government priorities. And indeed, the first one really focuses on what Canada will be buying going forward in the coming 5-year period. And so there we were able to leverage Avison's proprietary tools, but also Canadian published government data as well on future defense acquisitions in the 5-year time frame. Finally, as we noted earlier, surety of supply remains a critical issue here too. And so we considered those requirements that Canada has for access to various services and material at times of elevated international demand, which is typically a crisis or wartime. What were those elements of equipment and service that Canada needed to have provided in Canada to be able to safeguard national sovereignty? To qualify as a KIC, and we'll talk about this list in upcoming slides, one really had to be able to hit multiple of these criteria. That was sort of a section where we drew the line. And before we get to the KICs, again, keeping you in suspension a little bit longer, we wanted to show you how each one of these criteria actually played out among our 3 sort of baskets of KICs. When you think of pursuing emerging growth opportunities, as you remember, those were sort of the forward-leaning technology areas. The most critical issue was, frankly, market growth. Secondary considerations were the size of the industrial base and upcoming Canadian procurements. Market growth here is the real core driver in this first basket, however. These are technologies that are emerging and growing at often exponential pace, and these are sectors that we see Canada being primed to enter with some nascent capability, but the ability to grow in that sector rapidly. In that second basket, advantage leading Canadian competencies, our core considerations were the size of the industrial base in Canada and the overall market size. So in this segment, we're really talking about established Canadian firms playing in established global defense markets. Canadian procurement also clearly played a role in this assessment, as did market growth to an extent. Finally, that last basket, maintaining strategically important capabilities, really the core issue here was surety of supply. That last column that you see all the way on the bottom right, that was the core consideration here, and certainly as was Canadian procurement going forward. The industrial base was certainly another consideration as well. And so you see how the combination of criteria we talked about on the previous slide is sort of mapped out in this space, and how different criteria play a different role in these different baskets of KICs. To get to the KICs list, Avison conducted a considerable amount of analysis, and I won't bore you with the actual slides there on the back, and we can flip through to them. But Avison took on itself to essentially analyze market demands, leveraging its proprietary databases and institutional knowledge that we have, as well as our experts across the sector, looking at supply, working through a long list of Canadian firms and organizations that we've talked to over the course of the last 2 years, working with CADSI and AIAC, leveraging our OMX partners, attending trade shows, talking to government, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, really analyzing Canadian government priorities, looking at the Defense Acquisition Guide, maintaining a regular dialogue with a host of stakeholders at D&D, and then developing our own database of procurements going forward. And so for each one of the segments that we looked at, we developed analysis that you've got some screenshots of here. And that became the sort of the fact base that we worked off of as we evaluated our initial priority list of KICs. And here's the final list. I know you've been waiting for some time to see it. I won't read through all of these, but again, let me pick one from each of these baskets and walk through them. In basket 1, pursuing emerging growth opportunities, I think you won't be surprised to see cyber resilience. This is a great example of a KIC that exhibits strong growth, very strong spillover, as you can imagine, between the commercial and defense sector, that cross-pollination between the sort of civilian industry and the banking, finance, and other areas, and the need for cyber resilience in the national security domain. If you think about leading Canadian competencies, training and simulation jumps out at you immediately. I think there's no surprise that Canada has long led in this sector, both in live, virtual, and constructive training, led by both large globally competitive firms like CAE, but also small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada as well. So this is an area of a true competency going forward, and one that has played in a market that's shown incredible dynamism over the last decade. Finally, bucket 3, if we could stop and look for a moment at in-service support. These are all the activities that revolve around maintaining, supporting, upgrading Canadian kit and platforms and equipment across all the domains. A segment that has long been accepted as one that's critical for Canada to have in its own purview within its own borders. I do want to be clear that Avison's methodology was clearly geared towards yielding a targeted number of KICs. There was no magical number we were chasing, but expanding the criteria and making subtle changes to the criteria we talked about earlier certainly would expand this list or would shrink this list if we chose to do so. And it is important to understand definitions here. At the back of the slide, and I will perhaps flip through to the end, and I will walk you through these definitions just very, very briefly. Each one of these pages has absolutely critical definitions for each one of the KICs. As you look at this, it is important to note, if we look at the second one from the bottom, in-service support, again, IS spans the full range of lifecycle activities associated with platform sustainment, including maintenance, repair, overhaul, mods, and upgrades, and the post-acquisition support. But our analysis here really suggests that program management and engineering capabilities really should be the ones that are highly valued as part of this KIC. High-touch activities are more than likely to remain in Canada, regardless, frankly, of government policy. And so, as I said, and other stakeholders consider KICs and how they operationalize KICs, we think that focus should be on program management and engineering. And so we've tried to do that for each one of these KICs. We've tried to highlight those specific capability areas that are most critical to Canada going forward. So let me flip back to our list here. As we round out our conversation today, we'd very much like to hear from you. Does this list of KICs make sense? Does this list of KICs need to be shorter or longer? And we want to talk also about how KICs can be operationalized and institutionalized in the Canadian context, potentially as part of the ITB process and the value proposition, but also certainly going forward. I do want to note one other thing before we flip to the next slide. We've gotten lots of questions, particularly from the small and medium business community, about finding themselves in these KICs. It would be difficult for us to, in this format, present all the various capabilities and activities and that go into each one of these services and products. But if that capability is resident in Canada, and if it contributes to any one of these KICs, it is part of that KICs process. So think of things like nanoengineering or advanced manufacturing. You don't find them here on this list, but they are core elements of development in many of these KICs. And so the list of KICs is only 17 long, but in fact it encompasses a much broader array of capabilities and activities and technologies. I think I noted it earlier on that implementation is really almost as important as the actual list of KICs itself. And so what we'd like to think about, and the critical questions we've been asking all our interlocutors today, is how we can frankly promote each one of these sectors. And we've listed out some questions here. Certainly for this first bucket, we'd like to again promote investment in the development and commercialization of emerging technologies. And so what are frankly the best ways to channel dollars into that sector? For leading Canadian competencies, the big question is, how does government lend support to drive innovation, success, and continued exports of leading Canadian firms? And then finally, on the maintaining strategically important capabilities, the big question here is, how does Canada successfully ensure the continued availability, the continued domestic availability of capacity in these critical sectors? And so these are all questions that we're grappling with and we're talking to stakeholders across Canada on, and we look forward to hearing your views on them as well. Finally, I do want to highlight that the KICs process is part of a much broader construct here within the context of the relationship between government and the defense industry, but all that really packaged within the bounds of the national economic policy. There are a host of other tools out there that the Canadian government and public sector stakeholders in Canada can employ to help industry, academia, and other players. Clearly, existing procurement tools such as the ITB policy will continue to enforce direct offsets across all sectors of the Canadian space. And clearly, as academics think about this, they will continue to channel funding into academia as part of the ITB process. Government-to-government programs may help develop bilateral and multilateral defense programs that can drive Canadian excellence, including Canadian players in the global supply chain, enhanced export support, regulatory standards where Canada takes its excellence in setting regulations to drive its own industrial and technology sectors. And then finally, increasing interoperability between Canada and many of its partners, and showcasing Canadian capabilities in that space will also drive future success for the Canadian defense landscape. This is the last slide I will burden you with at this point. Just the next steps. We are, as you can all see, we've developed a preliminary list of KICs. We are now deeply embedded in the feedback mode here, talking to industry and industry associations, talking to the provinces and territories, and talking to members of the academic community, which have a core role in all of this. As we gather the various feedback and outputs, our mandate is to report back to government, both on KICs, but also the reaction to KICs, and frankly suggestions and ideas on how KICs can best be implemented in Canada. And the government will then move forward with developing a policy approach to all these issues. Nothing is set in stone. We very much appreciate the time you've put in this call, and very much look forward to any questions or comments you have now. And then also encourage you to take advantage of the online portal as well to share additional feedback and ideas going forward.
Thanks. That was great, Alex. So just the first question we've got here, and please, anyone online, submit any questions you've got. You know, a big part of the listeners on today's webinar, the theme is around academia. So how specifically, like, what does this mean more specifically to the academic community? What can they expect more specifically to maybe happen from these recommendations that you're making, or from the feedback they provide?
Thanks very much, and thanks to everyone that's been on the line, putting up with my coughing. You know, I think the academic community plays a core role here because it is such an integral part of the innovation agenda, and the innovation agenda obviously is a critical element of the government's policy in growing the Canadian economy and growing Canadian capabilities in the defense sector, but also much more broadly. Clearly, as many of the folks on the phone know, the academic community and the research and development community across Canada in the nonprofit sector have played an important role in the IRB and ITB process in the past, and we certainly see that going forward. Ideally, the KICs process will drive targeted spending into those areas that the Canadian government deems critically important to the economy, to its national security, and to its future economic growth. And the KICs will help, frankly, funnel funding and energy of global OEMs and other players into that space. So we'd like to see continued benefits going to academic institutions in conducting targeted research, and perhaps most importantly, making sure that research extends outside the academic space, and that it becomes credibly developed and commercialized across the board, commercialized in cooperation with large industry and potentially the sponsors of that research, but also with small and medium-sized enterprises as well. So we'd like to see, frankly, the KICs process inform how ICED and other players government players in this sector help channel funding to those areas that have strong growth, will have an impact on the defense sector, will grow jobs in Canada, and again, ultimately drive export success as well. So we'd like to see everything from the right basic research being done, but all the way through the commercialization process and the process of inculcating that Canadian IP that's been developed into the commercial sector and the defense sector. So that's sort of the desire here. And again, it relates back to these issues of greater transparency and greater focus. So we hope KICs would accomplish that.
Yeah, and that's great. And Alex, I know that's what we spoke about earlier today. Even at OMX, we're the data center for academia and industry and government to go and look at capabilities. But our real passion is in trying to make sure that some of these changes that might happen really promote the collaboration between all sort of 3 or even 4 of those sides of the coin, and then also taking it from not just the R in R&D, but through the development, commercialization, and then actually benefiting Canadian companies and IP to export and grow and become leaders in some of these key industrial areas. So I think just for a final message, so thanks so much. This has been a great presentation. And the final message really is to encourage everyone to provide more feedback through the online, through the website that we've created, and to provide that feedback. And we've got sort of one final webinar tomorrow, and we'll wrap that up. So please provide the feedback. And thanks again to you, Alec, and to Avison. This is really exciting work, and we're looking forward to next steps again.
Yeah, thank you very much again, and thanks.
Implemented in Canada.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody again for listening in. And we really look forward to your inputs on how we can do this better with greater efficacy, and again drive growth and IP development in Canada going forward. So thanks to the OMX team and thanks to all our participants today.
I just wanted to note that there were a couple comments that came in through the question section. I will be making note of those and passing them along to the Avison team to follow up with. There was one person that was wondering if the slide deck is going to be made available. So Alec, I'm not sure if you could speak to that.
Yes, certainly. And if folks could, I think probably the easiest thing is to if they could send you their email, and we can pass that on. But we have been sharing this deck with folks in individual meetings, the webinar, and then group meetings really across Canada. So we could certainly share the deck as well. Okay,
thanks so much. And I think that's it. As I said, there will be a follow-up email going out with a link to a feedback portal. Any questions that you have between now and the next couple of days, please send them to haley@theomx.com. I believe everyone that's registered today should have my email. And I'll make sure that you get the feedback portal and a recorded version or a slide deck sent to you within the next couple of days. So thank you so much. Thanks, Avison, for bringing us on to be a partner with you on this.
Okay, that's okay.
Thank you very much to everybody.